Christmas night. The dinner had been warm, familiar, the kind they'd shared every year since the divorce. Eli slept soundly in his room. Haley pulled on her coat, ready to leave. Grant called her back. No anger, no trembling. Just a single sheet of paper placed on the table between them. A DNA test. Is he really my son? Haley's face drained of color. Her lips parted, but no sound came. Her eyes darted away, searching for an escape that didn't exist. The answer she feared most had finally arrived. But Grant didn't know yet that this confession would shatter everything he believed about the last 9 years. Could he still be a father, when he wasn't the biological one? 2 years before that Christmas night, Grant and Haley had signed divorce papers at a lawyer's office downtown. No shouting, no broken dishes. No accusations thrown across a courtroom. They simply sat beside each other, pens in hand, and ended what had started 8 years earlier with hope and promises. The marriage had faded quietly, not from betrayal or cruelty, but from the slow realization that they had become strangers sharing the same address. They tried therapy. They tried date nights. They tried pretending everything was fine for Eli's sake. But eventually, they had to admit the truth. They were better apart than together. When it came time to decide custody, Eli chose his father. He was 4 years old then, small enough to still fit comfortably in Grant's arms, but old enough to know what felt safe. Grant never asked why. He didn't need to. The boy clung to him during pickups, slept easier in his bed, laughed louder in his presence. Haley didn't fight it. She loved her son, but she also knew when she wasn't the first choice. Still, they remained civil, respectful even. They coordinated holidays. They attended Eli's school events together. They made sure the boy never had to choose between them in public. It wasn't the family they had planned, but it was the best version of what remained. Grant had built a life around his son. Mornings started with oatmeal and cartoons. Evenings ended with chapter books and tucked-in blankets. Weekends meant soccer practice in the park, bike rides around the neighborhood, trips to the library where Eli would stack picture books higher than his head. Grant worked from home as a software consultant, which gave him the flexibility to be present. Not just physically, but fully there, helping with homework, listening to rambling stories about recess drama. Being the person Eli ran to first when something went wrong. It was a good life. Quiet, predictable, and safe. Grant never looked at his son and saw anything but love. Until October. It started with hives. Eli woke up covered in red welts that spread from his chest to his arms. His face swelled. His breathing turned shallow. Grant didn't hesitate. He scooped the boy into the car and drove straight to the emergency room, running 2 red lights on the way. The ER doctor was calm, efficient. She administered antihistamines, monitored Eli's vitals, and ordered blood work to check for underlying allergies. Eli sat on the hospital bed in an oversized gown, swinging his legs and asking if he could have a popsicle. Grant held his hand and told him everything would be fine. And it was fine. The swelling went down. The hives faded. Eli got his popsicle, grape-flavored, and fell asleep in the car on the way home. 3 days later, Grant received a call from the hospital. The nurse on the line sounded uncertain. She asked if he could come in to discuss Eli's blood work. Grant frowned. He asked if something was wrong, if there was a serious allergy they needed to know about. The nurse didn't answer directly. She just repeated that the doctor wanted to speak with him in person. Grant went alone. He didn't tell Haley. He didn't tell anyone. He assumed it would be a simple conversation, maybe a severe peanut allergy, maybe something about his diet. He sat in the sterile consultation room, hands folded on the table, waiting. When the doctor walked in, her expression was careful, measured. She sat down across from him and opened a file. "Mr. Hayes," she said, There's something unusual in Eli's blood work. Grant leaned forward. Unusual how? She explained it clinically. Eli's blood type was AB negative. Grant's was O positive. Haley, according to medical records from Eli's birth, was A positive. Grant stared at her. I don't understand. The doctor's voice was gentle but firm. Genetically, it's not possible for two parents with O and A blood types to produce a child with AB negative. The inheritance patterns don't allow for it. The words hung in the air. Grant felt something shift inside him. Not panic, not yet. Just confusion, thick and disorienting, like waking up in a room he didn't recognize. Are you sure? He asked. She nodded. I've reviewed the results twice. I wanted to bring this to your attention because sometimes there are clerical errors, mislabeled samples, records from another patient. But in this case, everything matches Eli's identity. Grant sat back in his chair. His mind raced through explanations. A hospital mix-up at birth, a lab mistake, something simple and fixable. But the doctor was still talking. If you'd like, she said carefully, we can arrange a paternity test. Just to confirm, it's non-invasive, a simple cheek swab. Grant nodded without thinking. Yes, do that. He left the hospital in a daze. He drove home on autopilot, barely registering the traffic lights or the turns. When he walked through the front door, Eli was building a tower out of blocks in the living room. The boy looked up and grinned. Daddy, look how tall. Grant smiled. He crouched down beside his son and helped him add another block to the top. His hands were steady. His voice was calm. That's really tall, buddy. Good job. But inside, something had fractured. The paternity test took 1 week to process. Grant didn't tell Haley. He didn't tell anyone. He went through the motions, work calls, school pickups, bedtime routines, while the question gnawed at him in the background. When the envelope arrived, he opened it alone in his home office. The door was closed. Eli was watching television in the other room. Grant pulled out the single sheet of paper. Probability of paternity, 0.0%. He read it 3 times. Then he folded it, placed it back in the envelope, and sat there staring at nothing. He didn't cry. He didn't shout. He didn't break anything. He just sat in the silence, feeling the ground beneath him dissolve. Because the truth was undeniable now. Eli wasn't his son. Not biologically. Which meant Haley had lied, not just once, but for years. Through the pregnancy, through the birth, through the divorce. She had looked him in the eye, signed custody papers, and let him raise a child that wasn't his without ever saying a word. Grant didn't know what to feel. Rage would have been easier. Grief would have made sense. But what settled over him was something colder. A numbness. A hollow ache that had no name. He thought about confronting her immediately, calling her, demanding answers. But something stopped him. Maybe it was the sound of Eli laughing in the next room. Maybe it was the fear that once he opened this door, everything would collapse, and there would be no way to protect the boy from the fallout. So Grant made a decision. He would wait. Christmas was 2 months away. It was the one time each year when the 3 of them came together. Dinner, gifts, the illusion of family. It would give him time to think, time to plan, time to figure out how to ask the question without destroying everything in the process. But those 2 months were the longest of his life. Every morning, Grant woke up and looked at Eli, and the question sat heavy in his chest. Every night, he tucked the boy into bed, kissed his forehead, and wondered if love could survive the absence of blood. He didn't treat Eli differently, not consciously. But there were moments, small, fleeting moments, where doubt crept in. When Eli laughed, Grant searched for pieces of himself in the sound. When the boy drew pictures at the kitchen table, Grant studied his features. looking for proof of something he had taken for granted for 6 years. And the worst part was that Eli noticed nothing. He was still the same bright, trusting child, still called him Daddy, still reached for his hand in parking lots, still believed, with absolute certainty, that Grant would always be there. Grant hated himself for the distance he felt growing inside him. Not toward Eli, never toward Eli, but toward the life he thought he had, toward the version of Haley he thought he knew, toward the fragile foundation he had built everything on. He kept the DNA test in his desk drawer, buried under old files, out of sight but never out of mind. And he waited for Christmas. Christmas Eve arrived with snow falling softly over the neighborhood. Grant spent the afternoon preparing dinner: roasted chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans, the same meal they had every year. Eli helped set the table, carefully placing forks and knives beside each plate, tongue poking out in concentration. The boy had been excited for days, counting down to the moment his mother would arrive. Grant moved through the motions mechanically, chopping vegetables, stirring gravy, checking the oven timer. His hands were steady, but his mind was somewhere else. The DNA test sat folded in his pocket, a small square of paper that weighed more than it should. He had rehearsed this moment 100 times in the past 2 months, what he would say, how he would ask, whether he would stay calm or let the anger finally break through. But now that the moment was here, he felt nothing but a cold, distant clarity. Haley arrived at 6 o'clock, right on time. She wore a red sweater and carried a shopping bag full of wrapped presents. Eli ran to the door before Grant could even stand up from the couch. "Mom!" Haley crouched down and pulled him into a hug, laughing as he squeezed her tight. She smoothed his hair back and kissed his forehead. "Merry Christmas, sweetheart. Did you help your dad cook?" Eli nodded enthusiastically. "I set the table, and I didn't break anything." Haley glanced up at Grant, smiling. "That's very impressive." Grant returned the smile. It felt like a mask. Dinner was exactly like every other Christmas dinner they'd shared since the divorce. Haley asked Eli about school, and he told her about his science project on volcanoes. Grant refilled water glasses and passed the bread basket. They laughed at Eli's jokes, even the ones that didn't quite make sense. For 2 hours, they were a family again, or at least, they looked like one. But Grant could feel the weight of the paper in his pocket. Every time Haley spoke, every time she smiled at Eli, the weight grew heavier. After dinner, they moved to the living room. Eli tore into his presents with the single-minded focus only a 6-year-old could muster: a new set of building blocks, a book about dinosaurs, a stuffed robot that made beeping sounds when you pressed its chest. Haley sat on the couch beside Grant, watching their son with the kind of soft expression that used to make Grant feel warm. Now it just made him tired. By 8:30, Eli's eyes were drooping. Grant carried him to bed, tucked him under the blankets, and turned on the small nightlight shaped like a rocket ship. The boy mumbled something about wanting to build a tower tomorrow, then rolled onto his side and fell asleep. Grant stood in the doorway for a moment, watching him breathe, the same way he had every night for 6 years. But tonight, the familiar ritual felt like standing at the edge of a cliff. When he returned to the living room, Haley was gathering her coat and purse. "I should get going," she said. "Early morning tomorrow." Grant's voice came out calm, steady. "Wait." Haley turned, her hand still on the coat draped over the armrest. "What's wrong?" Grant didn't answer right away. He walked to the dining table, pulled the folded paper from his pocket, and placed it flat on the surface. Haley frowned. She stepped closer, her eyes scanning the document. It took her a few seconds to process what she was looking at. When she did, all the color drained from her face. "Grant," he cut her off. His voice was quiet, but there was no warmth in it. "Is he really my son?" Haley's mouth opened, then closed. She shook her head quickly, too quickly, like she was trying to rewind time. This is a mistake. Where did you even get this? Grant didn't move. The hospital. 2 months ago. Eli had an allergic reaction. They ran blood work. His blood type didn't match ours. Haley's hands trembled. She pressed them together, twisting her fingers. Blood types can be wrong. Labs make mistakes all the time. I requested a DNA test. The words landed like stones. Haley stared at him. Her breathing quickened. Grant, please. 0%, Grant said. His voice was flat, emotionless. 0.0% probability of paternity. That's not a lab error, Haley. That's the truth. She backed up a step, her hand gripping the edge of the table for support. Her eyes darted around the room, looking for an escape, an explanation, anything that would make this go away. But there was nothing. Grant watched her unravel. Part of him wanted to feel satisfaction, vindication, but all he felt was hollow. Tell me the truth, he said. Haley's face crumpled. She sank down into one of the dining chairs, her hands covering her mouth. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. It was a mistake. Grant said nothing. Haley's shoulders shook. She wiped at her eyes, smearing mascara across her cheek. It was a class reunion, 7 years ago. I drank too much. I wasn't thinking. She stopped. Her voice cracked. Grant's jaw tightened. Who? It doesn't matter. It matters to me. Haley shook her head. Someone from high school. I haven't seen him since. It didn't mean anything. It was one night. One stupid, reckless night. Grant felt something cold settle in his chest. He had expected this answer. He had known, logically, that this was the only explanation. But hearing it out loud was different. Hearing her admit it made it real in a way the test results hadn't. You knew, he said. You knew the whole time. Haley looked up at him, tears streaming down her face. I didn't know for sure, not at first. But when Eli was born, I suspected. And then I was too afraid to check, too afraid of what it would mean. So you just lied. I didn't lie, Haley said desperately. I just didn't say anything. I thought maybe it didn't matter. You loved him. He loved you. I didn't want to ruin that. Grant's hands curled into fists at his sides. You didn't want to ruin it? Or you didn't want to lose custody? Haley flinched. Grant stepped closer, his voice rising for the first time. You let me raise him. You let me sign his birth certificate. You let me believe he was mine. And when we got divorced, you didn't say a word. You just let me take him, knowing that if I found out, I could lose him. I'm sorry, Haley sobbed. I'm so sorry. I was scared. I didn't know what to do. And then time passed, and it felt impossible to say anything. I thought maybe I'd tell you someday, when Eli was older, when it wouldn't hurt as much. Grant laughed bitterly. When wouldn't it hurt? Haley had no answer. Grant stared at her. This woman he had once loved, once trusted. He tried to find anger. He tried to find rage, but all he felt was exhaustion. Get out, he said quietly. Haley stood, her legs unsteady. Grant, please. We need to talk about this. We need to figure out what happens now. There's nothing to figure out, Grant said. Not tonight. Just go. Haley hesitated, her hand hovering near his arm, but she didn't touch him. She grabbed her coat and purse and walked to the door. Before she left, she turned back one last time. I never meant to hurt you, she said. Grant said nothing. The door closed softly behind her. Grant stood alone in the living room, surrounded by the remnants of Christmas. Wrapping paper scattered on the floor, Eli's new toys stacked by the tree. He sat down on the couch and buried his face in his hands. The days after Christmas blurred together. Grant didn't call Haley. He didn't answer her texts. He went through his routines, making breakfast, driving Eli to school, working from home, picking Eli up, making dinner. But everything felt distant, muted, like he was watching his own life through a foggy window. And the worst part was that he couldn't look at Eli the same way anymore. He tried. He wanted to. But every time the boy smiled at him, every time he called him Daddy, Grant felt something twist inside him. Not anger at Eli, never anger at Eli, but something else. Something darker, a question that wouldn't leave him alone. If Eli wasn't his, then what was he? Grant stopped tucking him in at night. He stopped reading bedtime stories. He stopped asking about school. He still made sure the boy was fed and safe, but the warmth was gone. The easy affection that used to come naturally now felt impossible to access. Eli noticed. At first, the boy tried harder. He brought drawings to Grant's office, asked if they could play catch, offered to help with dinner. But Grant's responses were short, distracted, cold. After a few days, Eli stopped trying. He became quieter, more withdrawn. He stopped running to the door when Grant came home. He ate his meals in silence. He went to bed without asking for a story. And Grant told himself it was fine, that he just needed time, that eventually the numbness would fade, and he'd figure out how to feel again. But time didn't help. One afternoon, Grant was cleaning Eli's room, picking up clothes, straightening books on the shelf, making the bed. He moved mechanically, not really paying attention to what he was doing. Then he saw it. A small piece of paper on Eli's desk, folded in half. Grant picked it up and opened it. The handwriting was shaky, uneven, written in pencil by a 6-year-old who was still learning how to form letters. "I'm sorry if I made you mad." That was all it said. Grant stared at the words. His legs gave out. He sank down onto the edge of Eli's bed, the note clutched in his hand. His chest tightened. His breathing turned shallow. Images flooded his mind, unbidden and relentless. Eli as a newborn, tiny and red-faced, screaming in the hospital while Grant held him for the first time and whispered that everything would be okay. Eli at 2 years old, taking his first wobbly steps across the living room and falling into Grant's arms, laughing. Eli at 4, holding Grant's hand on the first day of preschool, looking up at him with wide, trusting eyes and asking if he'd be there when school ended. Eli last week, building a block tower on the floor and calling out, "Daddy, look how tall," with the kind of joy that only children could feel over something so simple. Grant's throat burned. His vision blurred. He realized, with a clarity that felt like a punch to the gut, what he had been doing. He had been punishing Eli, not consciously, not intentionally. But the coldness, the distance, the silence, it had all landed on the one person who didn't deserve it, the one person who had done nothing wrong. Eli didn't know about the DNA test. He didn't know about Haley's affair. He didn't know that the foundation of his entire world was built on a lie. All he knew was that his father, his daddy, the person he loved most in the world, had suddenly stopped loving him back, and he thought it was his fault. Grant pressed the note against his chest and finally let himself break. He didn't cry often. He prided himself on staying composed, on being the steady one. But now, alone in his son's room, he sobbed, deep, wrenching sobs that came from somewhere he didn't know existed, because he had almost lost the most important thing in his life, not because of a piece of paper, not because of biology, but because he had let his own pain blind him to the child who needed him most. Blood didn't make Eli his son. Grant did. Every day, every choice, every moment he showed up, and he had almost walked away from that. The note was still in his hand when he heard the front door open. Eli was home from school. Grant heard the boy's backpack drop in the hallway, heard his small footsteps moving toward the kitchen. Grant stood up. He wiped his face. He folded the note carefully and placed it in his pocket, right where the DNA test had been 2 months ago. Then he walked out of the room to find his son. Eli was standing in the kitchen, staring into the open refrigerator. He didn't turn around when Grant walked in. His shoulders were hunched, his hand gripping the refrigerator door like it was the only solid thing in the world. Grant's chest tightened. He had seen his son stand exactly like this 100 times before, small, uncertain, waiting for someone to notice him. But this time was different. This time, Eli wasn't just looking for a snack. He was bracing himself. Grant cleared his throat softly. "Hey, buddy." Eli flinched. He closed the refrigerator door slowly and turned around, keeping his eyes on the floor. "Hi." The word came out flat, guarded. Grant's heart broke all over again. He knelt down, bringing himself to Eli's eye level. The boy still wouldn't look at him. Grant reached out carefully and placed a hand on Eli's shoulder. "Can we talk?" Grant asked. Eli nodded, but he didn't move. His small hands twisted together in front of him, fingers fidgeting with the hem of his shirt. Grant took a breath. "I need to tell you something, and I need you to listen, okay?" Eli finally looked up. His eyes were wide and glassy, the kind of expression that only appeared when a child was trying very hard not to cry. Grant's voice cracked. "I'm sorry." Eli's face crumpled. The tears he'd been holding back spilled over, and his whole body shook with the effort of staying quiet. Grant pulled him into his arms. Eli buried his face in Grant's shoulder and sobbed, deep, choking sobs that sounded too big for such a small person. Grant held him tight. One hand cradling the back of his head, the other wrapped around his narrow back. "I'm so sorry," Grant whispered. "I've been a bad dad. I've been cold and distant, and you didn't deserve that. None of this is your fault. Do you hear me? None of it." Eli's fingers clutched at Grant's shirt, holding on like he was afraid Grant would disappear if he let go. Grant kept talking, his voice thick with emotion. "I was upset about something that had nothing to do with you, but I let it get in the way. I let it make me forget what matters most. And what matters most is you. Always you." Eli pulled back just enough to look at Grant, his tear-streaked face red and blotchy. "I thought you didn't love me anymore." The words hit Grant like a freight train. He cupped Eli's face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away tears. "I love you more than anything in this world, more than my own life, and nothing will ever change that. Not a bad day, not a fight, not anything. You're my son. You'll always be my son." Eli's lower lip trembled. "Promise." Grant's own tears finally broke free. He nodded, his voice barely steady. "I promise." Eli threw his arms around Grant's neck and held on. They stayed like that for a long time, kneeling on the kitchen floor, wrapped around each other. Grant rocked him gently, the way he used to when Eli was a toddler waking from a nightmare. Eventually, Eli's breathing evened out. His grip loosened. Grant pulled back and wiped his own face with the back of his hand, then smiled at his son. "How about we make some hot chocolate?" Grant asked. Eli sniffled and nodded. "With marshmallows?" "As many as you want." They spent the rest of the evening together. They made hot chocolate. Eli insisted on adding an absurd number of marshmallows, and Grant let him. They sat on the couch and built a tower out of Eli's new blocks, competing to see who could stack them higher without toppling the whole thing. They laughed when it inevitably crashed to the floor, scattering pieces across the carpet. And for the first time in weeks, Grant felt like himself again. That night, after Eli fell asleep, Grant sat alone in the living room with his phone in his hand. He stared at Haley's name in his contacts for a long time, before finally typing out a message. "We need to talk. Tomorrow. Just us." Her response came within seconds. "Okay. Where?" Grant named a coffee shop downtown. Neutral ground. Somewhere public enough that neither of them would lose control. The next morning, Grant dropped Eli off at school and drove straight to the cafe. Haley was already there, sitting at a corner table with her hands wrapped around a cup of tea. She looked exhausted. Dark circles under her eyes, hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, no makeup. Grant sat down across from her without ordering anything. Haley spoke first. Her voice was quiet, tentative. "How is he?" "He's fine," Grant said. "No thanks to me." Haley's eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them back. "I'm sorry. I know that doesn't mean anything. But I am. For all of it." Grant leaned back in his chair, his arms crossed. "I didn't come here for an apology." "Then why did you come?" "Because we need to set boundaries," Grant said. "For Eli's sake." Haley nodded slowly. "Okay." Grant's jaw tightened. "I don't forgive you. I don't know if I ever will. What you did, lying to me for years, letting me believe he was mine, keeping quiet even after the divorce, that's not something I can just move past." Haley's face crumpled, but she didn't argue. "But Eli doesn't deserve to suffer because of our mistakes," Grant continued. "He didn't ask for any of this, and he loves you. So we're going to keep doing what we've been doing. Holidays, dinners, co-parenting. For him." Haley wiped her eyes. "Thank you." "I'm not done," Grant said. His voice was firm, steady. "You don't get to tell him. Not now. Maybe not ever. That's my decision to make. And if you try to go behind my back, if you try to take him from me or use this against me in any way, I will fight you. Legally. With everything I have." Haley's breath hitched. But she nodded. "I won't. I promise." "And one more thing," Grant said. He leaned forward, his eyes locked on hers. "As far as I'm concerned, I'm his father. On paper, in his life, in every way that matters. The biology doesn't change that. And if you ever try to tell him otherwise, if you ever make him doubt that, we're done. Completely." Haley pressed her trembling hands flat on the table. "I understand." Grant stood up. "Good." He walked out of the cafe without looking back. Over the next few weeks, life slowly returned to normal. Grant and Eli fell back into their routines. Morning cartoons, after-school snacks, bedtime stories. The distance that had opened between them closed, replaced by the easy warmth they'd always shared. Eli never asked why his father had been upset. He was 6 years old. He didn't need to know the complicated, painful truth about adult mistakes. All he needed to know was that his dad loved him, and Grant made sure he felt that every single day. Haley kept her distance. She still came over for holidays and special occasions, but there was a new formality between her and Grant. Polite, civil, but no longer warm. Grant didn't resent her presence for Eli's sake, but he also didn't pretend things were the same. Some wounds didn't heal. They just became part of the landscape. One Saturday afternoon in late January, snow began to fall outside. Thick, heavy flakes that blanketed the neighborhood in quiet white. Grant and Eli spent the morning building a snowman in the front yard, complete with a carrot nose and a scarf borrowed from the hall closet. Eli's cheeks turned red from the cold, and his laughter echoed down the empty street. When they came back inside, frozen and dripping melted snow onto the hardwood floor, Grant made them both hot chocolate. They changed into dry clothes and settled on the living room floor with one of Eli's new robot kits, a complicated model with dozens of tiny pieces that needed to be snapped together in just the right order. Eli sat cross-legged, his tongue poking out in concentration as he examined the instruction manual. Grant handed him pieces one at a time, guiding him through the steps without taking over. "This one?" Eli asked, holding up a small gray connector. Grant nodded. "Yep, That goes right there. Eli pressed it into place and grinned. We're getting good at this. We are, Grant agreed. They worked in comfortable silence for a while. The only sounds the soft click of plastic pieces locking together and the hum of the heater in the corner. Outside, the snow continued to fall. Eli leaned against Grant's shoulder, his small body warm and solid. Grant wrapped an arm around him, holding him close. And in that moment, Grant understood something he hadn't fully grasped before. Fatherhood wasn't about blood. It wasn't about genetics or biology or whose name appeared on a birth certificate. It was about showing up, day after day, year after year. It was about the quiet, unglamorous work of being present, making breakfast, tying shoelaces, reading bedtime stories, wiping away tears, celebrating small victories. It was about choosing to stay. Grant looked down at Eli, who was now humming softly to himself as he attached the robot's arms. The boy's hair was still damp from the snow. His cheeks were flushed. He looked utterly content. Grant tightened his arm around him. I love you, buddy, he said quietly. Eli looked up, his face breaking into a bright, easy smile. I love you too, Daddy. And that was enough. Outside, the snow fell silently, covering the world in white. Inside, the warmth of the room wrapped around them. The robot sat half-finished on the floor between them, waiting to be completed. Grant kissed the top of Eli's head and picked up the next piece. They had all the time in the world,